There are literally thousands of synthesizers, drum machines, sequencers, and samplers available. This video is about choosing the right hardware for you. We'll take a look at why I use the specific pieces of gear that I use and what each of them does especially well for my improvised live performance workflow. We're also going to take a look at a couple of exciting new additions to the rig, each of which plays a really specific role in the performance. One of them is very visible and very noticeable, and the other one is very much behind the scenes. And one of them is a total game changer for almost any portable live performance setup. And if you're interested in any of the gear that you see in this video, there are affiliate links down in the description below, and obviously that helps support the channel if you do decide to get anything, and at no additional cost to you. And I did also want to give a huge thank you to everyone who has subscribed to this channel. We just went over 2,000 subscribers, and when I started this a year ago, never thought that that was even going to be an option. I just wanted to share the things that I was learning along the way of developing my production and performance skills, and sharing that with everybody. And I really appreciate those of you who have been around since the beginning and those of you who have just joined. And if you haven't, I'd appreciate it if you just click subscribe down below and click the bell, and then tell your friends about it and let them know what we do here. I really do appreciate all of you. Thank you so much for giving me a place where I can share my love of this kind of music, my love of this kind of gear, my love of learning, and my love of teaching. So again, thank you all so much, and I look forward to seeing you here for a long time to come. All right, so here we have the complete live setup, complete as it is right now. Each piece in this setup does something specific, and I'll run through it really quickly just to let you know what each one does, and then I'll talk just a little bit about why I selected each one of these pieces for the particular style of music that I want to play, the particular style of live performance that I want to do, and just things that work with my brain and with my workflow, you know, what kind of makes sense in my head. So let's get started over here on the left-hand side. This is the Electron Digitakt. This is handling everything that is drums and a bit of percussion as well, although there's percussion coming from other places as well. But this is kind of the sequenced percussion and sequenced drums, and kind of the basis of the rhythm section, and kind of the foundation of all of that stuff. On the right side over here, we have the Elektron Digitone, and this is a 4-track or 4-channel, 4-voice FM synthesizer. And so I can have 4 different channels worth of different sequences, different voices, different synth voices and synth sounds, all playing off of one relatively small machine here. In the center, we have the Elektron Octatrack, and this is acting as a couple of different things. First and foremost, performance mixer. So the outputs from the Digitone are these orange cables going into the C and D inputs in the Octatrack, and the yellow ones over here coming from the Digitakt, and those are going into inputs A and B. So I've got basically 2 stereo channels coming in from these 2 devices, and this is where those get mixed and used, manipulated, and things like that. The other couple things that this is being used for is an effects unit, so kind of like what you would have on a DJ mixer. I come from the world of DJing and production, and I wanted to combine those together in my live setup. And the idea of being able to have a whole bunch of different effects that are assignable on this crossfader is really important. This template I did not design myself. This was designed by a guy named Matthew, who has a YouTube channel under EasyBot, and I'll link that down in the description. Absolute genius with this gear, and couldn't have this setup without this template that he put together, which gives me a way to have these inputs come in and be affected, and it also gives me a way to do all of these different performance effects, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. The final thing that the Octatrack does in my workflow, although it does a lot of other things in the grand scheme of things, it can do a lot of other things, but the other thing that I use it for is a live looper during performance. So channels are set up to take loops of what's going on. Then I can assign that to different sides of the crossfader, so I can fade across to have this play just the recorded loop of what was just being played. That allows me some smooth transition so that I can then go in while that's playing, change different settings on different machines to move to a different song, and then blend into that other song as you would if you were mixing tracks on a DJ setup. So it allows for a lot of freedom to be able to use the equipment live and improvise and come up with interesting stuff on the fly. Now, in the center here, I have the 1010 Blackbox, which is another sampler sequencer. So we've got a sampler here, sampler here, sampler here. Now, why do we need different samplers? Well, each one is doing a different job. If I was using the Octatrack as a sampler, in this setup, I would need to use some of the tracks which I'm using right now for effects and loopers to be able to play samples. And I would rather have this do those things because the other devices don't do those things. The 1010 Blackbox, what's really interesting about this as compared with something like, say, the Digitakt, is that this can do full-length samples or very long samples, and it will time stretch them. So it can be MIDI synced to the rest of the kit here, and those samples can be time stretched. So I can use them in all different sorts of scenarios. I can also have banks of presets within this, which allow me to set up different banks of samples that I can then trigger. Now, I'm just triggering these samples as basically clips, like you would trigger clips in Ableton, and this allows me to use them for specific things. The clips that I have here are virtually all for one of two things, either kind of background atmosphere ambiance things as part of the performance, or as vocals, because those can be time stretched again. So uniquely set up for that. So while one's doing drums, the other one is being performance mixer, this one is playing longer samples that can be then time stretched, that I'm using mostly for background ambiance. The 16 channels on this are being controlled by the Novation Launch Control XL over here. 8 of them using faders, 8 of them using knobs across the top. And then the knobs here are used for high pass and low pass filter. Same up above. These are high pass and low pass filters for tracks 9 through 16. This allows me to avoid menu diving into this to change volumes, mix things up, add filter, add high pass, add low pass, bring things in, bring things out. I can do that all using the launch control. So all I'm using really the touchscreen for in performance is to launch these different samples, and then I can fade them in. Over here I have these sliders MIDI mapped to the volume of each one of the samples, so that this increases the volume just as if it was an audio mixer, but it's actually a MIDI mixer, if you want to call it that. The 1010 Blackbox is also running through the Strymon Big Sky. And again, it's because of the type of samples that I'm using within this, because they're background and atmospheric and ambient sounds. Reverb is something that's really important for those in the style of music that I play. So having that run through here becomes very important. There are internal reverbs in here, but again, menu diving on each individual sample, this allows me to take whatever's playing and put it through a reverb, and then I've got filter access here and volume access here. So the key things for the type of performance that I do are outside of the box, and then here I can just launch individual samples. So just to give you an idea of what that might sound like, so if I was to launch, let's say, sample number 6 in here, so I could then bring that up. So you can hear it's very kind of atmospheric background ambiance. Now, if I want to filter that, I can filter that high pass. If I feel like that will fit better with the song that I'm building on stage, I can add reverb. So as you can see, that adds a lot to the background, to the ambience of things. Again, if I wanted to bring in another sample, let's say number 3, I can bring in that individual sample. And you can hear it's just kind of a background sound, again, that I can filter. If I feel like this will add more to the performance, then I can add in some reverb. So that helps me lay a foundation underneath the tracks that I'm building. Okay, so that's the Blackbox, the Big Sky, and the Launch Control XL. The audio routing actually goes from the Blackbox into the Big Sky, from the Big Sky into the inputs on the Digitone, and then those are summed up with what's coming out of the Digitone, and that's coming out and going into the right side. So basically, as a performance mixer, this is set up as right side is everything that is melodic, and left side is everything that is drums and percussion. And that allows me to do things like low passing and high passing just the drums or just the melodic elements. And so it really makes it so that it's very flexible and kind of takes this in pieces and makes it so that it's easy to perform with. Talking about audio routing, the master out from the Octatrack then goes into the Electron Analog Heat. This is adding saturation, a bit of drive, and it's got a high pass filter where the frequency is brought way down to just above 20 hertz, and then there's a resonant boost in that. And what that does is the filter isn't actually cutting off anything because it's down below at like 20 hertz, but that resonant boost that you get right before the cutoff is between 30 and 50 hertz, so you're getting a boost right at 40 hertz where you want your low end to have a little bit more power. So that's how this is set up here. And then there is a little bit of a high boost as well because the system kind of needed it to help everything really cut through and punch through with that low end boost. So that's the analog heat, and then the outputs from that are going out to right now a recorder, but they would go in a live scenario that would go out to the house system, whether that's through a DJ mixer or directly into a mixing desk. Now, what we didn't talk about here is the two new additions to the system. First one is right here. This is absolutely crazy semi-modular synthesizer that's called the Quadrantid Swarm. And what I felt like my system was missing here, I had drums that I had control over, I had synth parts that I had control over, I had ambiance and background and vocals and things that I had control over, effects, all of that stuff. But I felt like I was missing that bit of kind of organized chaos and spontaneity and improvisation that I love in the type of techno music that I make. So adding this gives me a way to patch modular patches live during performance, gives me 8 different oscillator models to be able to switch around from, gives me a lot of control hands-on of the synthesizer that's actually there and the different voices that are within that. Gives me LFOs, modulation, envelopes, all sorts of things that I can play with live and improvise. And it gives me an 8-step sequencer which can actually be reset using CV, so it allows you to make it much more random than just a repeating 8 bars, or repeating 8 steps. So just to show you a little bit about what this can do. So if we get this started, so we have the sequencer going here, and just one trigger is going on the sequencer right now. Okay, but we have the ability to add in different triggers, and then we've got 2 filters here. And this is using one of the synth voices. This is using just the organ voice. But if I was to change this to, say, the metal, which is one of my favorite ones, it changes up the synth voice using the same triggers that we have set in here. That's back to the organ. Now, each one of these triggers isn't quantized to a specific step. So these knobs here allow you to sweep through different sounds. So let's say I wanted, let's go make this easier to hear. If I wanted to change the sound of this, right? So you can move that around and put it wherever you want, and you can do that with every one of the steps. So I have the steps all kind of keyed, but in different places, so it doesn't go from low to high. They're kind of all over the place because I want to encourage happy accidents during performance. I want to encourage spontaneity. So what I'll do is I'll just start adding it. And then I can start messing around with things like So as you can see, there's a lot that you can do to kind of improvise with this. And that for me was the kind of missing element, that everything else was very controllable, very much within a sequencer. Although with the electrons, I can add in a lot of different probabilities and different things like that to make it a bit more random and a bit more kind of happy accident generating. But adding in the Quadrantid Swarm is something that really added an additional dimension to what I do here. So just to give you an example, so we'll just get started on the sequence here, and I'll bring in one of these kind of background bits that we had talked about before. Maybe I'll filter this way down low. Right, and then I have the opportunity to bring in things like a synth sound from the Digitone. And then I can filter my kick way down here, and I can bring in a kick drum and take that filter off. Now I've got something going that's relatively controlled. It's relatively kind of a foundation of something improvised. So now if I want to start to add in something that is really truly improvisational, I can start letting the swarm do what it does. Back to the things that are kind of foundational to what I'm playing here. Like for example here, I know that 6 and 7 are always cymbals. 6 is always a closed hat, 7 is always an open hat in every one of the different soundscapes that I create within this and save. So if I want to bring in, let's say, an offbeat open hat, the Digitone is, if you notice, if you push function and LFO, you get this mixer page where the 8 knobs here then become your volume control for your 8 different tracks. So if you want to turn down your hi-hat or bring it back up, or if you want to fade in a closed hat, so now we've got all of these different pieces working, coming in through the Octatrack. And right now the Octatrack is just acting as a summing mixer, putting these together and putting them out through the Analog Heat. But what I can do right now with this is I have all of these assignable effects down here. So let's say I want to assign a high pass filter of the entire thing to B. Then when I fade this across to B, that's going to high pass everything coming into both stereo inputs. And that gives me a chance to create a little break. And then bring it back in again and kind of keep things going. There's a whole bunch of other effects here that I go into a little bit more in detail in another one of my videos, but I can just show you a couple of different things. For example, this lo-fi effect. Let's say we pull out the kick and we're doing a little bit of a break and we want to make it a bit more lo-fi and crunchy. And then back. And now if this sequence has played out its bit and we want to start to modify things a bit, start to mangle things up a bit. Just as a reminder, back in the background of all of this, if I take this out and I take out the drums and I take out the synth, we still have this adding a bass foundation to everything that we're doing here in the background. And then another element coming back in, then the drums and percussion elements coming back in. And then we can bring back in our and then we can change around our pattern here, and we've got something totally different. Then we've also got an LFO here that can control different things like the envelope trigger. So just an example of how all of these different pieces and parts each play a really unique and individual role in this setup. Each one of them is kind of a specialist at what they do. Every single piece that's being used here can do many more things than what I'm doing with them, but each one of them does something specific really well, and that's what I'm trying to take advantage of in this system, rather than have one piece of kit that does everything and then having to dive into menus and switch around and go from track to adjust and another track to adjust and another track just to be able to use one piece of equipment. This allows me to have the freedom to have a 4-track performance mixer at my fingertips for the 4 tracks on the Digitone, an 8-track performance mixer here. I've got all of my different tracks effects assignable here. I've got 16 tracks of quantized and time stretch samples here, which I can run through effects, and I have control over each individually. And then I have a piece that I can mess around with and mangle and improvise with live on the fly. Everything's designed to create music live on the fly, and everything that you just heard is something that wasn't rehearsed or pre-planned or practiced. I don't even know which patterns these are set up on right now, because that's a big part of my method of performance. It's getting to know the instruments well enough so that you can get the sounds out of them that you want out of them live in a performance situation. This for me is the way I'm going to be performing for a while now. I'm taking my time to really get to know everything deeply and be able to use this in and create the music that I want to create live in a performance scenario in front of the crowd. Now, I promised you guys something special, and I'm going to come around here and show you the behind the scenes machine that is so key to what's going on here. So this is from Seox, it's the DC7, and what this allows me to do is power the Analog Heat, the Digitakt, the Digitone, the 1010 Blackbox, and the Big Sky, all with one plug going out to a power supply, to a wall socket. Normally, each one of these pieces of equipment has its own box, its own connection, its own plug, and in the middle of that plug there's a huge box. So I had 6 different boxes for everything that's here. So this allows me to control, of the pieces of gear that I have here, it allows me to control 5 of them with just one plug going to the power supply. So what's amazing about that is, with a portable setup, it was impossible to have this gear in the case that I have and then keep all of those power supplies in here to be able to move around and set up for a show. What this allows me to do is to set up and power the entire setup here off of 3 plugs. One is going to the Octatrack, the DC7 is controlling these 5 units here, and then the Swarm has its own plug as well. So being able to control all of these different pieces of gear from basically 3 plugs in a power strip rather than having 1 per each. So very cool, amazing, and I'm going to go into depth in that in a video coming up really soon, and so keep an eye out for that video so that we can talk a little bit more in depth about the DC7, how I use it, how you can use it, and then a little bit more in another video in depth with the Swarm and what it does, how it works, and why it might be something great for your performance setup as well. So I hope you enjoyed the video and you got something informative out of it, or at least it was a fun way to pass a few minutes. If you have any questions about anything that I talked about in here, please feel free to put those in the comments down below. I try my best to answer every question that people put out there. If I know the answer, and if I don't, I can help you look for it or point you maybe in the right direction of somebody who is an expert and knows the answer to the question that you might have. And if you enjoyed this video, if you could give it a like down below, the algorithm and I would both really appreciate that, and that would definitely help this video get out to a bunch more people so we can help share the knowledge with as many people as we possibly can. Thank you so much for choosing to spend some of your time with me here today, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care of each other.